The sun shone brightly over the clean streets of Westfield, a mid-sized city where the grass seemed greener and the roads smoother than in neighboring towns. This wasn't by chance. It was all thanks to Mayor Richard Mitchell, who had been running the city for nearly 8 years now. But this story isn't about the mayor, it's about his son, Brandon Mitchell. At 22 years old, Brandon Mitchell had never known what it felt like to hear the word no. Standing tall at 6 feet with perfectly styled brown hair and designer clothes that cost more than what most people in town made in a week, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew he was untouchable. Brandon's red sports car zoomed through a stop sign, music blasting loud enough to make windows shake. He barely slowed down as he passed Officer Taylor, who was parked on the corner. The officer recognized the car immediately and just shook his head. Last time he'd pulled the mayor's son over, he'd ended up with parking duty for a month. Another free pass for the prince, Officer Taylor muttered to himself, watching the car disappear around the corner. Brandon pulled into his reserved parking spot at Skyline, the most exclusive club in Westfield. The spot wasn't officially his, but after his father made a few calls to the owner about potential fire code violations, it somehow became available whenever Brandon wanted it. "Hey, Tom," Brandon shouted to the bouncer, skipping the long line of people waiting to get in. The big man unhooked the velvet rope without a word, ignoring the complaints from those who had been waiting for hours. Inside, Brandon headed straight to his usual table in the VIP section. It was Friday night, and the club was packed, the bass from the speakers making the floor vibrate. 3 bottles of expensive champagne were already waiting for him and his friends. "The man of the hour," shouted his friend Pete, raising a glass. "Thought you weren't coming." Brandon grinned as he dropped into the plush seat. "Had to make a quick stop. Dad's assistant kept bothering me about showing up to some charity thing tomorrow." "And?" asked Lisa, Pete's girlfriend, as she sipped her drink. "Told her I'd think about it," Brandon laughed. "Which means I'll be sleeping till noon and then hitting the golf course." The night went on, with Brandon ordering more bottles, never once looking at a price. Money wasn't real to him, just numbers that his father's position made appear in his bank account. By midnight, he was slapping $100 bills down as tips, making sure everyone saw his generosity. "Your dad must be proud," said a guy who had joined their table, a friend of a friend whose name Brandon hadn't bothered to remember. "Proud?" Brandon scoffed. "He should be thanking me. Half the reason people vote for him is because I make our family look good." He ran a hand through his hair. "Besides, one day I'll be running this whole city." When Brandon accidentally knocked over a waitress carrying a tray of drinks, he didn't help her pick up the broken glass. Instead, he tossed a few bills at her and said, "Buy yourself something nice. And bring us another round." His friends laughed, but Lisa looked uncomfortable. "You could at least say sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" Brandon looked genuinely confused. "That's her job." "And I paid for the mess." Later that night, as they left the club, Brandon stumbled slightly on the steps. Pete reached out to steady him. "I'm fine," Brandon said, pulling away. "Just need some air." A group of people were waiting outside, hoping to get in. When one of them accidentally bumped into Brandon, his mood changed instantly. "Watch where you're going," he snapped, shoving the guy back. "Whoa, man, sorry," the stranger said, hands up in a peaceful gesture. No harm meant. "Do you know who I am?" Brandon stepped closer, puffing out his chest. "My father runs this whole damn city." Pete tried to pull him away. "Come on, Brandon, let's just get some food." But Brandon wasn't listening. The entitlement that had been building for years, fueled by every time he'd gotten away with breaking rules, was taking over. He felt invincible, untouchable, a king in his kingdom where no one could tell him what to do. Little did he know, just a few blocks away, Officer James Wilson was responding to a call that would change everything. In less than 20 minutes, Brandon Mitchell would learn that being the mayor's son couldn't protect him from the consequences of his actions, not this time. Officer James Wilson pulled his police cruiser into the driveway of his modest 2-bedroom home just as the sun was rising. He just finished a night shift that had run 2 hours longer than scheduled. Tired but satisfied with a job well done, he quietly entered the house, careful not to wake his family. In the kitchen, he found a note from his wife, Tanya. "Dinner in the fridge. Kids missed you. Thomas lost another tooth. Love you. James smiled, opening the refrigerator to find a plate of homemade lasagna wrapped in foil. Even after working a 12-hour hospital shift as a nurse, Tanya had still made time to cook his favorite meal. After warming up the food, James sat at the kitchen table and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through photos of his son Thomas, 8, proudly displaying a gap-toothed grin, and his daughter Zoe, 11, showing off her science fair project. He'd missed both moments because of work, but he never complained. Being a police officer wasn't just a job to him, it was a calling. James had joined the Westfield Police Department 15 years ago, right after college. Back then, he'd been one of only 3 black officers on the force. Now, there were 7 out of 58, better, but still not enough to reflect the diversity of the community they served. Over the years, James had earned the respect of most of his colleagues through hard work and professionalism. He turned down 2 promotions that would have taken him off the streets because he believed in community policing, getting to know the people in his beat, building trust, being a familiar face. Can't change things from behind a desk, he often said when people asked why he hadn't moved up the ranks. After finishing his meal, James showered and changed into jeans and a comfortable t-shirt. Despite having been awake for nearly 24 hours, he had somewhere important to be. At the Westfield Youth Center, a group of teenage boys were already shooting hoops when James arrived. The center was located in Pine Heights, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. "Officer Wilson's here," called out Dion, a lanky 14-year-old. The boys paused their game, gathering around James. "Who's ready to learn something today?" James asked, clapping his hands together. For the next 2 hours, James ran a workshop on basic car maintenance. He showed the boys how to change a tire, check oil levels, and jump-start a battery. These were practical skills that could help them get jobs or just save money down the road. "My dad was supposed to teach me this stuff," said Alex, a quiet 16-year-old who rarely spoke up. "But he's been gone 3 years now." James put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." After the workshop, the center's director, Mrs. Powell, brought James a cup of coffee. "You look exhausted," she said. "Don't you ever sleep?" James laughed. "Sleep's overrated. These kids need someone who shows up consistently." "You know," Mrs. Powell said, lowering her voice, "I heard some of the boys talking. They want to be police officers because of you. That's something special, especially these days." James nodded, understanding what she meant. The relationship between law enforcement and communities of color was complicated at best, broken at worst. Being a bridge between those worlds wasn't easy, but it was necessary. On his drive home, James stopped at a red light and noticed a police cruiser pull up beside him. Officer Reynolds, a veteran cop with 25 years on the force, rolled down his window. "Wilson, thought you'd be home sleeping by now." "Youth Center," James explained. "Teaching the kids about cars." Reynolds shook his head. "Always the Boy Scout. You make the rest of us look bad, you know that." James laughed. "Just doing my part." As the light turned green, Reynolds called out, "Hey, you working tonight? Heard there might be trouble downtown. Mayor's hosting some fancy fundraiser." "Yeah, I'm on at 8, James replied. "Why, you expecting problems?" "Nothing specific," Reynolds said with a shrug. "Just a feeling. Watch yourself out there." As Reynolds drove away, James didn't think much of the warning. In 15 years on the job, he'd handled everything from domestic disputes to armed robberies. He'd been shot at twice and had talked down countless tense situations without ever firing his weapon. What James couldn't know was that in just a few hours, a chance encounter with the mayor's son would test everything he stood for: his professionalism, his patience, and his belief in equal justice for all. Friday nights in downtown Westfield were always busy, but tonight was especially crowded. The streets were packed with people heading to restaurants, bars, and clubs. Officer James Wilson had just started his shift when his radio crackled to life. "We've got a disturbance outside Club Elite on Main Street. Caller reports an intoxicated male harassing staff and refusing to leave. Any units in the area?" James picked up his radio. "Unit 47 responding. I'm 2 blocks away." As James pulled up to Club Elite, he could see a small crowd gathered outside. The club's neon blue sign cast an eerie glow over the scene. Several people had their phones out, recording whatever was happening, never a good sign. James parked his cruiser and approached on foot. As he got closer, he could hear someone shouting, "Do you know who my father is? He could shut this whole place down tomorrow." Pushing through the crowd, James saw a young man in expensive clothes yelling at a muscular bouncer who stood with his arms crossed, blocking the club entrance. James recognized the angry young man immediately. Brandon Mitchell, the mayor's son. He'd never dealt with him personally, but Brandon's reputation was well known among the police force. "Is there a problem here?" James asked calmly, stepping between Brandon and the bouncer. The bouncer, whose name tag read Mike, looked relieved to see a police officer. "This gentleman has had too much to drink. I refused him entry, and he's been causing a scene for the past 15 minutes. Brandon turned his anger toward James. "Finally, a cop. Arrest this guy for discrimination. He's refusing to let me in while letting others through." James could smell the alcohol on Brandon's breath from several feet away. The young man's eyes were bloodshot, and he was swaying slightly. "Sir, it appears you've had quite a bit to drink tonight. The establishment has the right to refuse service to anyone they believe is intoxicated," James explained. "That's bull," Brandon slurred. "They just don't want the mayor's son in there because they're doing something illegal, probably selling drugs." Mike the bouncer sighed heavily. "Look, man, I let you in here all the time. Tonight you're just too drunk. Come back tomorrow." James nodded. "That seems reasonable. Why don't I help you find a ride home, Mr. Mitchell?" Brandon's face darkened at being addressed by his name. "How do you know who I am?" "I'm familiar with the mayor and his family," James replied professionally. "Now, let's get you home safely." James reached out, not to grab Brandon, but simply to guide him away from the entrance, when Brandon suddenly jerked back. "Don't touch me," he shouted, loud enough that more people turned to watch. "I'm not going anywhere. I paid for VIP access to this club." A few people in the growing crowd recognized the mayor's son and began whispering. James noticed more phones being raised to record the interaction. "Mr. Mitchell," James said quietly, "you're creating a public disturbance. I'm asking you politely to step away from the entrance and let me help you find transportation home. And I'm telling you to do your job." Brandon pointed at the bouncer. "Arrest him for discrimination." James maintained his calm demeanor. "There's no discrimination happening here, sir. The club can refuse entry to anyone who appears intoxicated. That's the law." Brandon stepped closer to James, invading his personal space. "You don't get to decide what the law is around here. My father does. Maybe you need a reminder of how things work in Westfield." People were openly staring now. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed entertained by the drama. A few were filming everything. James took a deep breath and tried once more. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand you're frustrated, but this behavior isn't helping. Let's talk about this away from the crowd." Brandon glanced around, seemingly noticing the audience for the first time. Instead of calming down, he appeared energized by the attention. "Oh, now you want to talk privately. Scared people will see how Westfield cops really treat the mayor's family." Brandon's voice grew louder with each word. James could see the situation escalating quickly. In 15 years on the force, he'd learned to recognize the warning signs. The flushed face, the clenched fists, the increasingly aggressive stance. What happened next would be captured on dozens of phones and would change both their lives forever. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brandon stood there, swaying slightly, staring at Officer Wilson with growing anger in his eyes. The crowd around them had grown larger, forming a loose circle. Most people were just watching, but at least a dozen had their phones out, recording everything. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Officer Wilson said, his voice firm but not aggressive. "Please step away from the club entrance so we can talk." Brandon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Talk? You want to talk now?" He turned to the crowd. "Hey everyone, this cop wants to talk to the mayor's son." He made air quotes with his fingers, nearly losing his balance in the process. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Officer Wilson noticed a young woman step forward, concern on her face. "Brandon, come on," she said. "Let's just go get some food. Pete's waiting in the car." Brandon waved her off without looking. "Not now, Lisa. I'm handling this." Officer Wilson saw an opportunity. "Your friends seem ready to leave. Why don't you join them? I'm sure they'd be happy to give you a ride home." "I'm not done here," Brandon insisted, his words slightly slurred. "I paid for VIP access to this club, and I'm going in." He turned and tried to push past the bouncer, who stood his ground. When the bouncer didn't move, Brandon spun back toward Officer Wilson. "Are you just going to stand there? Do your job." Brandon's face had turned red with frustration. "Sir, I've explained the situation. The club has the right to refuse entry to anyone who appears intoxicated. That's not discrimination, that's the law." Something in Brandon's expression changed. His eyes narrowed as he looked Officer Wilson up and down. "I get it now," he said, his voice dropping. "You're one of those cops who thinks the rules only apply to certain people." Officer Wilson kept his expression neutral, though he immediately understood what Brandon was implying. "The law applies equally to everyone, Mr. Mitchell." Brandon stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward Officer Wilson's chest without quite touching him. "Don't pretend you don't know how things work in this town. My father runs this place. These cops," he gestured vaguely at the police car, "they work for him." Officer Wilson took a deep breath. "I work for the citizens of Westfield, all of them. And right now, you're disturbing the peace." The crowd had grown quieter, sensing the confrontation was escalating. Someone in the back whispered, "This is going straight to TikTok." Brandon's friend Lisa tried again. "Brandon, please. Your dad wouldn't want this. Let's just go." At the mention of his father, Brandon's anger seemed to boil over. "Don't tell me what my father wants," he shouted at her. Then, turning back to Officer Wilson, he lowered his voice to a menacing whisper that those closest could still hear. "You know what? I don't like your attitude. And I don't like cops who don't know their place." Officer Wilson remained professional, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sir, I'm going to need you to take a step back." Instead, Brandon moved closer, his face just inches from Officer Wilson's. "Or what? You'll arrest the mayor's son. Good luck with that. My dad will have your badge before morning." "This is your final warning," Officer Wilson said calmly. "Step back and lower your voice, or I will have to detain you for disorderly conduct." For a moment, it seemed like Brandon might actually listen. He paused, swaying slightly on his feet. But then his gaze drifted to the crowd watching them, and something in him seemed to snap. "You know what? I'm sick of this," Brandon suddenly shouted. He shoved Officer Wilson hard in the chest with both hands. Officer Wilson stumbled back a step but kept his balance. "Sir, you just assaulted a police officer. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Brandon's response was immediate and shocking. He lunged forward, swinging his fist toward Officer Wilson's face. "Don't you tell me what to do." Officer Wilson ducked the wild punch and moved to restrain Brandon, who was now completely out of control. As he grabbed Brandon's arm, the mayor's son began shouting words that made everyone in the crowd flinch, ugly, racist slurs that seemed to pour out of him like poison. People gasped. The phones kept recording. And in that moment, Brandon Mitchell sealed his fate in a way his father's influence couldn't undo. Everything happened so fast after Brandon threw that punch. Officer Wilson sidestepped the wild swing and in one smooth motion, grabbed Brandon's arm and twisted it behind his back. The mayor's son yelped in surprise as Wilson guided him to the ground, his knee in the small of Brandon's back as he pulled out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for assaulting a police officer," Wilson said firmly, his voice steady despite what had just happened. The crowd had gone silent, everyone watching with wide eyes as the mayor's son was handcuffed right there on the sidewalk. "Get off me," Brandon shouted, his face pressed against the concrete. "Do you know who I am? My father will destroy you." Officer Wilson didn't rush, making sure the handcuffs were secure but not too tight. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Wilson recited the Miranda rights, Brandon continued to yell threats and insults. The bouncer, Mike, stepped forward and offered to be a witness. "I saw everything, officer." He definitely swung first. A young woman in the crowd nodded. "I've got it all on video if you need it." Several others murmured in agreement, holding up their phones. Officer Wilson thanked them and called for backup. Within minutes, another police car arrived. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, taking in the scene with raised eyebrows. "Mayor's son," he asked quietly as he approached. Wilson nodded. Assault on a peace officer. Multiple witnesses plus videos. Rodriguez whistled low. Chief's gonna love this. Together, they helped Brandon to his feet. He had stopped yelling, but was glaring at Wilson with pure hatred in his eyes. My father will have your badge for this, he hissed as they guided him toward the patrol car. Maybe, Wilson replied calmly. But tonight, you're going to jail. Brandon's friend Lisa pushed through the crowd, her face pale with worry. Brandon, I called your dad. He said to cooperate, and he'll meet you at the station. Something in Brandon's expression changed at that. For just a second, he looked like a scared kid rather than an angry drunk. But it passed quickly, replaced by a sneer. Tell my father to bring our lawyer, he said loudly before ducking into the back of the police car. As the car drove away with Brandon inside, Officer Wilson stayed behind to collect witness statements and contact information. His body camera had captured everything, but having civilian footage would strengthen the case. People were already sharing their videos online. By the time Wilson finished at the scene, clips were being reshared across social media with captions like "Mayor's son a tax cop" and "Drunk rich kid gets what he deserves." Back at the police station, Wilson found a flurry of activity. The night desk sergeant looked up when he walked in. Wilson, everyone's talking about what happened. The chief wants to see you in his office right away. Wilson nodded, not surprised. As he walked toward the chief's office, he passed the holding cell where Brandon sat, now more subdued. The mayor's son wouldn't meet his eyes. Chief Thompson was on the phone when Wilson knocked on his door. He waved him in, his expression unreadable. Yes, Mr. Mayor. Officer Wilson just walked in. I understand your concerns, but... He paused, listening. With all due respect, sir, we have multiple witnesses and video evidence. Another pause. I'm afraid that's not possible. Your son assaulted an officer. Wilson stood quietly waiting. He could imagine what the mayor was saying on the other end of the line. After hanging up, Chief Thompson sighed heavily. So, the mayor's son. Yes, sir, Wilson replied. Tell me exactly what happened. Wilson recounted the events outside the club, his voice professional and matter-of-fact. When he finished, the chief leaned back in his chair. The mayor wants the charges dropped. Claims his son was provoked. Wilson stiffened. Sir, I followed all protocols. The body count footage will show. The chief held up his hand. I know, Wilson. You're one of my best officers. I trust your judgment. He rubbed his temples. But this is going to be a political nightmare. Just then, there was a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices, including one that Wilson recognized as Mayor Mitchell's. Where is my son? I demand to see him immediately. The chief stood up. Here we go. Wilson braced himself as the door burst open and Mayor Mitchell stormed in, followed by a man in an expensive suit who could only be his lawyer. The mayor's face was red with anger. Thompson, I want my son released right now, he demanded, then pointed at Wilson. And I want this officer suspended pending an investigation. Chief Thompson remained calm. Richard, your son assaulted Officer Wilson in front of dozens of witnesses. It's already all over social media. I don't care. The mayor snapped. Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation? To our family name? As the adults argued, no one noticed the police station janitor pausing outside the open door, phone in hand, quietly recording everything the mayor was saying. By 6 o'clock the next morning, Brandon Mitchell's arrest was the only thing anyone in Westfield was talking about. The videos had spread like wildfire overnight, jumping from local social media groups to regional news sites, and by dawn, even national outlets were running the story. Mayor Richard Mitchell woke up to his phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. His press secretary had already sent 14 urgent messages. He groaned as he scrolled through the headlines. Mayor's son arrested after attacking police officer. Racist rant by Westfield mayor's son caught on camera. Privilege and power. Mayor's son expects special treatment. Richard rubbed his tired eyes. After hours at the police station last night, he'd only managed to get Brandon released on bail. Chief Thompson had refused to drop the charges even after Richard had reminded him who approved the police department's budget. Dad. Brandon stood in the doorway of Richard's home office, looking pale and disheveled. The cocky attitude from last night was gone, replaced by something that almost looked like fear. "It's bad, isn't it?" Richard didn't sugarcoat it. "It's worse than bad. Your face is on every news channel in the state." He turned his laptop around to show Brandon the footage playing on a news website. Brandon winced as he watched himself shoving Officer Wilson and swinging wildly. The video captured everything: his drunken rage, the racist slurs he'd hurled, his threats about his father's position. Seeing it sober, Brandon looked away, unable to watch himself. "I messed up," he mumbled. "That doesn't begin to cover it," Richard snapped. "Do you have any idea what this could do to my career? To our family?" Before Brandon could answer, the doorbell rang. Richard's assistant, Diane, who had arrived early to help manage the crisis, poked her head in. "Sir, there are reporters gathered outside. At least 6 news vans. And Councilwoman Torres is on the phone. She's calling for an emergency city council meeting." Richard cursed under his breath. Councilwoman Torres had been his biggest rival for years. She'd jump at any chance to challenge him. "Tell her I'll call her back, and no comment to the press." Across town, Officer James Wilson sat at his kitchen table with his wife Tanya. Their kids were still asleep, but they'd be up soon, possibly asking questions about why their dad was on TV. "The chief told me to take today off," James explained, stirring his coffee absently. "Said it might be better if I stayed away from the station while things cooled down." Tanya reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You did your job. You did nothing wrong." James nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "I know that, but this isn't just going to go away. The mayor's already trying to spin it, saying I used excessive force. But the videos clearly show you didn't." "Facts don't always matter as much as they should," James said quietly. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Officer Rodriguez. "Check your email. Chief wants all officers to see his statement before it goes public." James opened his email to find a message from Chief Thompson to the entire department. It was brief but clear. "The Westfield Police Department stands by Officer Wilson's actions last night. After reviewing body camera footage and witness videos, we find that Officer Wilson acted with appropriate restraint and professionalism when confronted with an aggressive individual. The fact that this individual is related to a public official does not exempt them from the law." James showed the email to Tanya, who smiled with relief. "The chief is backing you up? That's good, right?" "It's a start," James agreed. "But the mayor won't give up easily." By mid-morning, the story had exploded. City Hall was flooded with calls from angry citizens. The video had been viewed more than 1 million times. Local businesses began posting messages of support for Officer Wilson on their social media pages. At noon, Mayor Mitchell called an emergency press conference on the steps of City Hall. Wearing his most solemn expression and his best suit, he stood before a forest of microphones. "As mayor of this great city and as a father, I want to address the unfortunate incident that occurred last night," he began, his voice carefully measured. "My son's behavior was unacceptable, and I do not condone it in any way." The gathered reporters looked skeptical. One called out, "Sources inside the police department said you tried to have the charges dropped. Is that true?" Richard ignored the question. "I believe in treating all citizens equally under the law. My son will face the appropriate legal consequences for his actions." Another reporter shouted, "What about reports that you threatened Officer Wilson's job?" Before the mayor could respond, a new video began circulating online, footage from inside the police station showing Mayor Mitchell demanding his son's release and Officer Wilson's suspension. The video, apparently taken by the janitor who had overheard everything, contradicted everything the mayor was now claiming at his press conference. As reporters began receiving the new video on their phones, the press conference descended into chaos. Questions flew from all directions. Did you lie about trying to get the charges dropped? Were you aware your son has a history of using racial slurs? Will you be resigning as mayor? Richard Mitchell stood frozen at the podium, watching his carefully crafted damage control crumble around him. His political instincts told him to keep talking, to find some way to spin this, but for once, words failed him. Meanwhile, at the youth center in Pine Heights, Officer Wilson was surprised to find a crowd of teenagers and community members waiting for him. They broke into applause when he walked in. Mrs. Powell stepped forward with a handmade sign that read, "Thank you, Officer Wilson." "We saw what happened," she said simply, "and we wanted you to know that we stand with you." For the first time since the incident, James Wilson smiled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't face them alone. 3 weeks after the incident that shook Westfield, Brandon Mitchell sat alone in the courthouse hallway. His expensive suit couldn't hide how tired he looked. The confident smirk that had once seemed permanently fixed to his face was long gone. The door to the judge's chambers opened, and his lawyer stepped out, followed by the district attorney. Brandon stood up quickly. "Well?" he asked, his voice betraying his nerves. His lawyer, Mr. Hoffman, adjusted his glasses. "The DA is offering a deal. Guilty plea to assault on a peace officer, but they're dropping the hate crime enhancement." Brandon swallowed hard. "And if I take it?" 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management and diversity training, and a public apology to Officer Wilson. Brandon nodded slowly. A month ago, he would have raged at the suggestion he needed to apologize to anyone. Now, after watching his father's political career implode and seeing himself through the eyes of an entire city, he just felt empty. "What about my dad?" Brandon asked. Mr. Hoffman's expression softened slightly. "The ethics investigation is still ongoing. But between the videos and the witnesses coming forward about previous incidents," he shook his head. "It doesn't look good." Brandon leaned against the wall, the weight of everything crashing down on him again. His actions hadn't just ruined his own reputation, they'd destroyed his father's career too. Mayor Mitchell had announced his decision not to seek re-election the previous week after 3 city council members publicly called for his resignation. "I'll take the deal," Brandon said quietly. 2 days later, Brandon stood on the courthouse steps facing a crowd of reporters and cameras. His hands trembled as he unfolded a piece of paper. "I want to apologize to Officer James Wilson," he began, his voice shaky at first, but growing steadier as he continued. "My behavior that night was inexcusable. Officer Wilson was simply doing his job, and I responded with disrespect, aggression, and horrible language that I am deeply ashamed of." He paused, looking up from his prepared statement. What he said next wasn't written down. "All my life, I've gotten away with things because of who my father is. I never had to face consequences. That night, for the first time, someone treated me just like everybody else, and I couldn't handle it." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, not just to Officer Wilson, but to everyone in Westfield who expected better from the mayor's son." Across town, Officer Wilson watched the press conference on TV with Chief Thompson in his office. "What do you think?" the chief asked. "Does he mean it?" James considered the question. "I don't know, but it's a start." Later that week, James received a letter from the mayor. Unlike the formal apology his son had delivered, this one was handwritten on personal stationery. "Officer Wilson," it read, "I failed as a mayor and as a father. By trying to shield Brandon from consequences his entire life, I created the young man you encountered that night. I am sorry for my attempts to interfere with your duties, and even more sorry that I didn't thank you sooner for being the first person to show my son that actions have consequences. Perhaps if he had met someone like you years ago, things would be different now. Sincerely, Richard Mitchell." James folded the letter and put it in his desk drawer. He wasn't sure how he felt about it yet.